Hello listeners, and welcome to tonight's bedtime story. This is Kat, and I'm here to read to you the last part of chapter 2. And we left off in where Pug was the last boy to be called to service, and it was the magician Colgan who stepped forward and called him. So Colgan's last words were, "I have need of an apprentice," and would call Pug, orphan of the keep, to service. So that is where we left off, and we're about to pick up tonight. So please get comfy, get a cup of tea, hot chocolate, whatever your fave beverage is. Feel free to pause and come back. And with that being said, I will now continue the story. This is The Magician, name of the book. A wave of murmuring swept through the assembled craftsmasters. A few voices could be heard saying it wasn't proper for a magician to participate in the choosing. The Duke silenced them with a sweep of his gaze and his face stern. No craftmaster would challenge the Duke of Crydy, the third-ranking noble in the kingdom, over the standing of one boy. Slowly, all eyes returned to regard the boy. The Duke said, "As Colgan is a recognised master of his craft, it is his right to choose. Pug, orphan of the keep, will you take service?" Pug stood rigid. He had imagined himself leading the king's army into battle as a knight lieutenant, or discovering some day he was the lost son of nobility. In his boyish imaginings he had sailed ships, hunted great monsters, and saved the nation. In quieter moments of reflection, he had wondered if he would spend his life building ships, making pottery, or learning the trader's skill, and speculated on how well he would do in each of those crafts. But the one thing he never thought of, the one dream that had never captured his fantasies, was that of becoming a magician. He snapped out of his shock state, aware the Duke patiently awaited his response. He looked at the faces of those before him. Father Tully gave him one of his rare smiles, as did Prince Arutha. Prince Liam nodded a slight yes, and Colgan regarded him intently. There were signs of worry upon the magician's face, and suddenly Pug decided it might not be an entirely proper calling, but any craft was better than none. He stepped forward and caught his own heel with his other foot and landed face down in the dust. Picking himself up, he half scrambled, half ran to the magician's side. The misstep broke the tension, and the Duke's booming laughter filled the courtyard. Flashing with embarrassment, Pug stood behind Colgan. He looked around the broad girth of his new master and found the Duke watching, his expression tempered by a kind nod at the blushing Pug. The Duke turned back to those who stood waiting for the choosing to end. "I declare that each boy present is now the charge of his master, to obey him in all matters within the laws of the kingdom, and each shall be judged a true and proper man of Crydy. Let the apprentices attend their masters. Until the feasting, I bid you all good day." He turned and presented his left arm to his daughter. She placed her hand lightly upon it, and they passed into the keep between the ranks of the courtiers, who drew aside. The two princes followed, and the others of the court. Pug saw Thomas leave in the direction of the guard barracks behind Master Fannin. He turned his attention back to Colgan, who was standing lost in thought. After a moment, the magician said, "I trust neither of us has made a mistake this day." "Sir?" Pug asked, not understanding the magician's meaning. Colgan waved one hand absently, causing his pale yellow robe to move like waves rippling over the sea. "It is no matter, boy. What's done is done. Let us make the best of things." He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Come, let us retire to the tower where I reside. There is a small room below my own that should do for you. I had intended it for some project or another, but have never managed to find the time to prepare it." Pug stood in awe. "A room of my own? Such a thing for an apprentice was unheard of. Most apprentices slept in the workrooms of their master, or protected herds or the like. Only when an apprentice became a journeyman was it usual for him to take private quarters. Colgan arched one bushy eyebrow. Of course. Can't have you underfoot all the time. I would never get anything done. Besides, magic requires solitude for contemplation. You will need to be untroubled as much as, or perhaps more, than I will. He took out his long, thin pipe from a fold of his robe and started to stuff it full of tobacco from a pouch that had also come from within the robe. Let's not bother with too much discussion of duties and such, boy, for in truth I am not prepared for you. But in short order I will have things well in hand. Until then we can use the time by becoming acquainted with one another. Agreed? Pug was startled. He had little notion of what a magician was about, in spite of the night spent with Colgan weeks ago, but he readily knew that what craft-masters were like, and none would have thought to inquire whether or not an apprentice agreed with his plans. Not knowing what to say, Pug just nodded. Good then, said Colgan. Let us be off to the tower to find you some new clothes, and then we will spend the balance of the day feasting. Later there will be ample time to learn how to be master and apprentice. With a smile for the boy, the stout magician turned Pug around and led him away. The late afternoon was clear and bright, with a gentle breeze from the sea cooling the summer heat. Throughout the keep of Castle Crichton and the town below, preparations for the festival of Banapas were in progress. Banapas was the oldest known holiday, its origins lost in antiquity. It was held each Midsummer's Day, a day belonging to neither the past nor the coming year. Banapas, known by other names in other nations, was celebrated over the entire world of Midkemia, according to legend. It was believed by some that the festival was borrowed from the elves and dwarves, for the long-lived races were said to have celebrated the Feast of Midsummer as far back as the memory of both races could recall. Most authorities disputed this allegation, citing no reason other than the unlikelihood of humans borrowing anything from the elven or dwarven folk. It was rumoured that even the denizens of the Northlands, the goblin tribes, and the clans of the Brotherhood of the Dark Path celebrated Banapas, though no one had ever reported seeing such a celebration. The courtyard was busy. Huge tables had been erected to hold the myriad varieties of foods that had been in preparation for over a week. Giant barrels of dwarven ale imported from Stone Mountain had been hauled out of the cellars and were resting on protesting, overburdened wooden frames. The workmen, alarmed at the fragile appearance of the barrel ricks, were quickly emptying some of the contents. Meager came out of the kitchen and angrily shooed them away. Leave off, there will be none left for the evening meal at this rate. Back to the kitchen, dolts, there is much work to be done yet. The workers went off, grumbling, and Meager filled a tankard to ensure the ale was at proper temperature. After he drained it dry, he satisfied himself that all was as it should be. He returned to the kitchen. There was no formal beginning to the feast. Traditionally, people and food, wine and ale, all accumulated until they reached a certain density. Then all at once the festivities would be in full swing. Pug ran from the kitchen. His room in the northmost tower, the magician's tower as it had become known, provided him with a shortcut through the kitchen, which he used rather than the main doors of the keep. He beamed as he sped across the courtyard in his new tunic and trousers. He had never worn such finery and was in a hurry to show his friend Thomas. He found Thomas leaving the soldiers' commons, nearly as much in a hurry as Pug. When the two met, they both spoke at once. "Look at my new tunic," said Pug. "Look at my soldier's tabard," said Thomas. Both stopped and broke into laughter. Thomas regained his composure first. "Those are very fine clothes, Pug," he said, fingering the expensive material of Pug's red tunic. "And the colour suits you." Pug returned the compliment, for Thomas did cut a striking figure in his brown and gold tabard, and it was of little consequence that he wore his regular homespun tunic and trouser underneath. He would not receive a soldier's uniform until Master Fannin was satisfied with his worthiness as a man-at-arms. The two friends wandered from one heavily laden table to another. Pug's mouth watered from the rich fragrances in the air. They came to a table heaped with meat pies, steam rising from their hot crusts, pungent cheeses and hot bread. At the table a young kitchen boy was stationed with a shoe-fly. His job was to keep pests from the food, whether of the insect variety or the chronically hungry apprentice variety. Like most other situations involving boys, the relationship between this guardian of the feast and the older apprentice was closely bound by tradition. It was considered ill-mannered and in poor taste merely to threaten or bully the smaller boy into parting with food before the start of the feast, but it was considered fair to use guile, stealth, or speed in gaining a prize from the table. Pug and Thomas observed with interest as the boy, named John, delivered a wicked whack to the hand of one young apprentice seeking to snag a large pie. With a nod of his head, Thomas sent Pug to the far side of the table. Pug ambled across John's field of vision, and the boy watched him carefully. Pug moved abruptly, a feint toward the table, and John leaned in his direction. Then suddenly Thomas snatched a puff pastry from the table and was gone before the shoe-fly lash began to descend. As they ran from the table, Pug and Thomas could hear the distressed cries of the boy whose table they had plundered. Thomas gave Pug half the pie when they were safely away, and the smaller apprentice laughed. "You're the quickest hand in the castle, I bet." Or young John was slow of eye for keeping it on you. They shared a laugh. Pug popped his half of the pie into his mouth. It was delicately seasoned, and the contrast between the salty pork filling and the sweet puff pastry crust was delicious. The sound of pipes and drums came from the side courtyard as the Duke's musicians approached the main courtyard. By the time they had emerged around the keep, a silent message seemed to pass through the crowd. Suddenly the kitchen boys were busy handing out wooden platters for the celebrants to heap food upon, and mugs of ale and wine were being drawn from the barrels. The boys dashed to a place in line at the first table. Pug and Thomas used their size and quickness to good advantage, darting through the throng, snagging food of every description and a large mug of foamy ale each. They found a relatively quiet corner and fell to with ravenous hunger. Pug tasted his first drink of ale and was surprised at the robust, slightly bitter taste. It seemed to warm him as it went down, and after another experimental taste, he decided that he liked it. Pug could see the Duke and his family mingling with the common folk. Other members of his court could also be seen standing in line before the tables. There was no ceremony, ritual, or rank observed this afternoon. Each was served as he arrived, for Midsummer's Day was the time when all could equally share in the bounties of the harvest. Pug caught a glimpse of the princess and felt his chest tighten a little. She looked radiant as many of the boys in the courtyard complimented her on her appearance. She wore a lovely gown of deep blue and a simple broad-brimmed hat of the same colour. She thanked each author of the flattering remark and used her dark eyelashes and bright smile to good advantage, leaving a wake of infatuated boys behind. Jugglers and clowns made their appearance in the courtyard, the first of many groups of travelling performers who were in the town for the festival. The actors of another company had set up stage in the town square and would give a performance in the evening. Until the early hours of the next morning, the festivities would continue. Pug knew that many of the boys the year before had to be excused duty the day following Banapas, for their heads and stomachs were in no condition for honest work. He was sure that scene would be repeated tomorrow. Pug looked forward to the evening, for it was the custom for new apprentices to visit many of the houses in the town, receiving congratulations and mugs of ale. It was also a ripe time for meeting the town girls. While dalliance was not unknown, it was frowned upon. But mothers tended to be less vigilant during Bedapis. Now that the boys had crafts, they were viewed less as bothersome pests and more as potential sons-in-law, and there had been more than one case of a mother looking the other way while her daughter used her natural gifts to snare a young husband. Pug, being of small stature and youthful appearance, got little notice from the girls of the keep. Thomas, however, was more and more the object of girlish flirtation as he grew in size and good looks. And lately, Pug had begun to be aware that his friend was being sized up by one or another of the castle girls. Pug was still young enough to think the whole thing silly, but old enough to be fascinated by it. Pug chewed an improbable mouthful and looked around. People from the town and keep passed, offering congratulations on the boys' apprenticeship and wishing them a good new year. Pug felt a deep sense of rightness about everything. He was an apprentice, even if Colgan seemed completely unsure of what to do with him. He was well fed and on his way to being slightly intoxicated, which contributed to his sense of well-being. And most important, he was among friends. There can't be much more to life than this, he thought. And that, my lovely listeners, is the end of chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for dropping in for the bedtime story. And stay tuned for chapter 3 coming soon.